Hey there and welcome back to Modern World History. In this video, we're going to talk about centripetal and centrifugal forces. And no, we're not talking about science here, but we're talking about something that's kind of the similar concept. But we're looking at forces of nationalism. Alright? So one of the things that we've been talking about a lot in this age of revolutions is this underlying idea of nationalism, or devotion to one's group of people that share a common ancestry and history and culture and language and all these different things. And we talked about in the last video how nationalism can be both a force of unification as well as a force of destruction. And so if you look at the Greeks breaking away from the Ottoman Empire, that's an example of a group breaking away from a larger empire. I guess you wouldn't call that a unification force, but more so of a force that would separate or break apart. Same thing with Austria. You think about the Austrian Empire being a group, one empire over a bunch of different separate ethnic and national groups. Those groups want to have independence over their own local countries, their own local territory. And so in the same way, that's kind of what we're looking at here. And we can break these different kinds of nationalism down between these terms, centripetal and centrifugal forces. So any nationalistic force that unifies is going to be a centripetal force, and any national force that divides is going to be a centrifugal force. Okay, so Austria, Russia, and the Ottoman Empire, all of these countries have just a bunch of different national groups who identify as individual nations. And so all of those groups, more or less, and we're going to see as time goes on, they do try to get independence. And some of them, even today, are still, in some of these places, fighting for independence, even now. And there are other independence movements or other kinds of separatist movements that exist in the world today having to do with these same centrifugal forces. But Germany and Italy are going to be united by centripetal forces. So you're going to see really how unifying nationalism can be in the case of both of these countries. So let's go ahead and take a look. So Italy's king, well, I guess Italy is going to unite because the king of Sardinia Piedmont, alright, so Sardinia Piedmont, the king here is going to be Victor Emmanuel the second. And Victor Emmanuel the second ends up appointing a prime minister, Camillo di Cavour. Now Cavour was a liberal, okay? So he was not an absolute. He kind of appealed more so to the Italian middle class, and Cavour set out to try to unify the various different Italian principalities or states under one rule, under the rule of the King of Sardinia Piedmont. And so he started off trying to take the north. And now, one thing I didn't mention in the previous video when we looked at the Crimean War is that the Sardinians actually go in and fight against the Russians on the side of the British and the French, mainly in order to make nice with the French, because they were thinking that perhaps the French would be able to help them later on with Italian unification. And they did. And so what Camillo Cavour did was he asked Napoleon III for assistance in helping with trying to defend against Austria in order to take over Venetia and a few of the other different Italian states in the northern Italian peninsula. And so he was able to successfully do this. And in the south, he was secretly making agreements with this guy, Giuseppe Garibaldi, who he and his people were known as the Red Shirts because they wore red shirts. Fancy that. And the Red Shirts conquered and united southern Italy under the leadership of Garibaldi, and then he went and met with King Victor Emmanuel and agreed to hand over his possessions in the south to Victor Emmanuel II. And so this enabled more or less all of the Italian peninsula to be under the leadership of Victor Emmanuel II. Now, Venetia is later on going to be taken from the Austrians in 1866, and then finally in 1870, the Papal States, which is kind of right in the middle, which is controlled by the Pope, who was headquartered in Rome, is going to go to Italy in 1870. And the Pope still governs in Vatican City even today, which is like a small part of Rome. It's considered one of the smallest microstates in the world today. It is a microstate. And again, the leader of the Vatican City is the Pope. So Germany also experiences unification due to centripetal forces. And their story is probably a little bit more, there's probably a little bit more work involved here. Maybe not. Might be a matter of perspective. The German Confederation, which consisted of 39 different German states, was controlled by the Austrians. Now here's the thing, is the Austrians, the Austrian Empire was extremely diverse, and Germans did not make up the majority. Didn't make up majority of the population. They were a large group, probably one of the largest groups in Austria. But remember, the Austrian Empire is an empire that is in control of various different national groups, and the centrifugal forces there. All these different groups want to be different kingdoms, or their own state. They all wanted their own state. The Prussians, however, were very strong, had a very strong military, and were almost entirely German. And so their nationalism like centripetal forces. Austrians like centrifugal, they wanted to break apart, but Prussia was together in their Germanness. So, in 1861, the leader of Prussia, Wilhelm I, asked the Prussian parliament for money in order to strengthen the military. And they were like, nope. Now, the reason for this is because in 1848, during all these different revolutions that occurred, one of the things is that the Prussian government was forced to create a constitution that kind of limits the king's power. And so Wilhelm was really kind of butthurt that he couldn't get any money from Parliament. And he was very conservative, and the Junkers, which are the aristocrats of Prussia, the landholders, they also agreed that Wilhelm should be able to get money from Parliament. So Wilhelm actually had put this guy, Otto von Bismarck, in control of Germany by making him his chosen prime minister. And Bismarck says, I'm going to rule with real politics, okay? So real politics is a word that means the politics of reality. And what he means by this is that with real politics, you're just going to kind of govern the way that it works out the best to be governed. It's kind of a harsh political ideology that is centered on doing what needs to get done, and Bismarck believed that the way things are going to get done is through blood and iron, not through speeches and trying to talk your way into things. And so obviously Bismarck is also quite conservative himself, and he decides he's going to overlook parliamentary approval for things like money. So he says no consent, no budget. He's just going to do what he wants to do in order to govern Germany, or in order to govern Prussia. And so Prussia and Austria, at first, they're allies. Austria is, remember, according to the Congress of Vienna, Metternich had decided that Austria was going to kind of be the overseer of the 39 German states. But Bismarck wanted to kind of take that power and unify Germany under their leadership. So he fought with Austria, and they fought against the Netherlands in order to take over the lands of, and we're probably going to mispronounce this, Schleswig and Holstein. Schleswig and Holstein. Prussia would get Schleswig, and Austria would get Holstein. And they would rule these areas, and everything would be great and well, except that Bismarck ends up trying to create a problem at the border with Austria, and he kind of stirred up this problem on purpose. All right, so I have to say that taking Schleswig and Holstein was a very important driver of nationalism among Germans that would increase the respect that they had for Prussia and for Prussian leadership. And that's really important for where we're going to go, because after Bismarck established or stirred up the problems with Austria at the border, this gave him the opportunity to fight we're going to call the 7 Weeks' War, which is going to give him the ability to impose Prussian power over Austria. And he knew that they were going to win. He knew they were superior. Bismarck's Prussia completely annihilates Austria during the 7 Weeks' War. It was a humiliating loss. Austria ends up losing tons of territory. They lost Venetia, so this right here is how Italy gets Venetia as part of their unification process in 1866. And they also lost more German territory. Places where Germans lived went to Prussia. And now at this point, Prussia has unified the eastern and the western parts of the Prussian Empire, and they control all of northern Germany. There's still a lot of Germans that are separate living in the south, and the reason for this is because they are mostly, overwhelmingly Catholic. And remember, the Protestants in the north and the Catholics in the south had always disagreed on religious problems, and they didn't feel together because of that. But they're all German, and they speak German. They have a common history and a common plight, and so Bismarck feels like he can bring these southern Germans around, and all he needs to do is crush their confidence in France and stir up nationalistic fervor that would make them want to join Prussia. And he's going to do that in the Franco-Prussian War. So, as I just said, southern Germany is mostly Catholic, and so Bismarck literally manufactured an incident in order to create conflict with France, and he did this by implying that the French ambassador had insulted the Prussian king. There was a letter involved, and the interpretation of this letter, Bismarck just made it look like this guy completely insulted the king. We still see this kind of stuff in politics today. France ends up declaring war as a result of this, and Prussia was ready. France made a mistake. They walked into the trap. Prussia quickly advanced and took over 80,000 prisoners, including Napoleon III himself. And they ended up forcing Paris to surrender. And after this, the Germans had lost confidence. They had gained confidence in Prussia and in Bismarck as a leader, and they wanted to join Prussia as a unified Germany. So now that the southern states had been threatened by France, they felt threatened by France, they wanted to take the opportunity to have this security, and they unified. So Germany ends up unifying as one. Wilhelm I goes from a king to being Kaiser, and was crowned. He crowned himself in the Palace of Versailles while they had occupied Versailles after they beat the French. And thus begins the Second Reich. So the First Reich was the Holy Roman Empire. And we've all heard of Third Reich. The Third Reich is going to be Nazi Germany under Hitler. So now the balance of power was divided between Britain. That shouldn't be there. The balance of power was divided between Britain and Prussia. I'm not sure why I wrote France there. Or I guess Germany, rather, because now at this point we're going to start calling it Germany. Yeah, France wasn't super weak, they weren't super strong, but Britain and Germany, they were the powerhouses of Europe, and this kind of starts setting the stage for what's going to come in the beginning of the 1900s. But before that, we need to talk about industrialization in the next unit from Modern World History. Thank you. See you there.